Welcome back to the Carrot and Stick podcast, a podcast series where we look to get under the skin of all things performance management to understand what makes our wonderful industry tick. Today, I'm sitting down with Edmund Blogg, a director over at RecruitHub, a company that's actually quite unique to this show. What they do is they take top-billing recruiters and take them through to being business owners, a very big and daunting step for many people, and these guys get in to make sure they can be as successful as possible. Today, we have some really interesting conversation topics, my favorite one being a whole discussion around OKRs, a goal-setting framework that I don't really see all that often inside of recruitment companies, but I'm very used to seeing it outside of it in things like software companies. We go through how to win hearts and minds as a leader, how to drive staff retention by rewarding incentives around people's lifestyle rather than strictly just giving them hard, cold cash. And overall, it just turns into a really lovely conversation. I hope you guys enjoy. So let's get started with Edmund Blogg over at RecruitHub. Right, Edmund, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you jumping on. First and foremost, I think it's always good for the listeners to know who they're listening to for the next potentially 30, 45 minutes. Who are you? What do you do? What's your background? Give us the rundown.
Sure. So I'm a co-founder of a business called RecruitHub, and we are basically an accelerator platform for early phase recruitment businesses. So we work primarily with high-performing recruiters or recruitment managers who are building their own businesses, and we provide an integrated platform on which they can do that. We've been operating for a little bit over 4 years. We support just over 100 agencies that we've launched in that time. Probably 70% of those are in the UK, and the remainder in the US. So yeah, that's my gig.
Interesting. So you find those that are performing really well want to set up their own thing and kind of help them make that jump from being an employee essentially to being their own boss by the sounds of it.
Yeah, exactly that. And the premise is really the majority of the customers we work with, it's all about monetizing their time effectively, and driving kind of ROI on the hours they put into that business. So we provide a platform that really kind of enables them to stay in their lane on the activities that really drive the business performance. So we take care of back office, brand, technology, that kind of stuff.
So everyone listening to this is now thinking, you stay away from my top performers. They're mine.
Well, I guess we can get on to that, right? We can chat a bit about retention in a moment, perhaps.
Definitely we can. It was one of the things that we highlighted as one of those 3 key topics you wanted to go through, actually. I guess we can introduce those now as well. So the 3 that you said, and I love these, by the way, you got them over way ahead of time. Most people, they'll jump on the call for a podcast and just be like, oh, well, let me think about that. And you've actually come really prepared. And your 3 were the importance of winning hearts and minds and not relying on incentives to do motivation. Perfect. Love that one. The second one was aligning incentives with lifestyle to drive retention versus purely monetary rewards. You mentioned a second ago, retention, which is good. And the final one, which I love the most, was using OKR frameworks in recruitment agencies, because I mentioned to you before we came live, probably less than 2% of our customers use OKRs very regularly in running their business. So I'd really love to kind of dig into that with you as well. Should we start from the top and work our way down there, or do you want to switch things up and change the order? What do you think?
No, that's fine with me. No, I'm delighted to have done my prep, and your briefing document was very, very thorough. So I felt obliged to.
Here we are being lovely to each other. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Awesome. Let's do that first one then. The importance of hearts and minds. We talk about leaders and needs to be able to win people over and all that kind of good stuff. And I think what you're saying here, you can't reduce it down to dangling a carrot in front of someone and saying, hey, look at the money you can get and that's your leadership done. There's more to it than that. So give us an idea here, explain what you mean by it, and then we'll have a good chat around it at that point for about 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, so I suppose it's because we spend so much of our time in the startup space. So, all of our customers are building businesses, and for them kind of getting this buy-in from their early team members is absolutely critical. It's kind of make or break if you're able to build an enthusiastic team that builds not just sales momentum, but kind of cultural momentum and kind of sets the tone. And I think it's something that we've seen again and again and again, is you can build the best incentive structure in the world and you can have the most attractive benefits and you can have, an awesome commission structure and whatever else. But there is so much more to building an engaged team than that. And so I think a huge part of that we're really exposed to in the work that we do is, especially in startup businesses, the founders typically are tremendously passionate. They've got a incredibly meaningful reason for doing what they're doing, and they've got all sorts of grand plans, and they don't always effectively communicate that to their team. And it's not a negative, it's just kind of part of the learning journey. And I think sometimes there can be frustration early doors when you're building a business and think, I just don't understand why people aren't trying hard enough to hit these metrics and grab all these goals that we've got set up for them. But there is a lot of work that needs to go into actually getting your team emotionally invested in the journey and understanding, okay, irrespective of, what I can win from doing this from a kind of, commission or bonus or whatever perspective, what's the buy-in? Why am I going on this journey? Where is it we're going? What's my role in it? And it's kind of, it's almost like the rewards are the icing on the cake, but they are not the cake itself. And if you have no cake, then to butcher my analogy, giving somebody a plate of icing, nobody wants to eat that. But you know what I mean? So there's just, I think sometimes it's an important part of that early phase building journey to realize my incentives cannot do all the work on their own. And people will sit and and ah about, commissions bandings and, exactly how to tweak and fine tune stuff. Of course, it's important. It's important from a profitability perspective. It's important for 1,001 reasons. But if it's not built on a foundation of this team, wants to be here, kind of whether we're getting, 1,000% incentive or 999%, those variables aren't going to make the difference. The difference is how much does your core group believe in what you're trying to do? How clearly has that been articulated to them? How often is it kind of kept alive in recurring conversations and almost internal presentations with the business? That's, I think, where there's a lot of opportunity for early businesses to get some big wins.
It's a really interesting point, because every founder, I think, faces that battle at some point, whether you're a recruiter or, I face it in the early days as well. As you hire people in, you're always told people who join after you will not care as much as you. And you're always kind of sat there scratching your head at first, like, well, why not? I'm excited. Why aren't you excited by this at the same level? And it is really hard to maintain that drive in people sometimes. And probably the really big example I can think of was during COVID. Yeah, it was a very illuminating moment, I think, for a lot of agencies when they were like, the team love working here. They're really passionate. They really see the purpose in what we do. And then COVID kicks in, and for a large number of them, they were like, oh, well, I'd rather stay at home and just, earn money doing nothing. Like, that's fine by me. I don't want to be working hard when everyone else is taking time off. And a few founders that I spoke to were really stunned by that people wouldn't commit hard to trying to save their business during a really tough downtime. And trying to come to terms with that is difficult. So to dig into that like a level deeper, we can say these high level things like, repeat the message and have a vision and communicate purpose and all that kind of stuff. What does that tangibly look like on the ground if you are trying to get your team bought into what it is that you and your company are all about? Because repeating what you might hear from outside of the industry, recruitment is recruitment. You're all doing the same thing in the same sort of way, and people will say that. And it's like, well, how can I really make people believe that what we're doing is special here?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't know that it's necessarily about what are we doing that's special. I think it's just about making sure that you have a really precise understanding of what your offering is to people that you're inviting to come on you with the journey of the next few years of the business, and making sure that then you're aligning the people that come into the business to that they find that exciting, they find that resonates with them. And we've had this in a few occasions with founders that we've worked with, where they've been in a bit of a kind of quandary. They've come out of some quite big high growth businesses, and for whatever reason, they're thinking, I don't know that I necessarily want to go and join the race to build the next 500 person staffing firm. So what am I offering people? Because if I say, like, I haven't figured this out, come and join me, I'll pay you a salary and a commission and we'll see where it goes. They know that's not enough. But when you sit down and kind of take them through the exercise of like auditing, what are you trying to do? What are you not trying to do? Who do you want in the business? Who do you not want in the business? How do you want them to behave? What do you want them to get out of it? You realize actually there is a pretty defined vision here. And then converting that vision, I suppose, like, to answer your question, what happens on the ground? It's part of your interview process. It's part of your induction and onboarding process. It's anchored in all of your recurring internal monthly, quarterly kickoff meetings. So it just becomes, the living fabric of the business. This is what we're about. But I think sometimes, businesses can either fall into various different traps. They don't do that at all, and there isn't a clear vision for employees, and they are just living by their own personal kind of career plans, however far that extends in the future, which might be as short as 6 months, and then we make it up again to do the next bit of the track. That's very sketchy, I guess, if you're trying to build something robust. Or you get sucked into creating kind of fluffy but slightly vague values. We're all about, whatever it is, integrity. And someone says, right,
that's what many do, is they turn around and say exactly that, right? We've got some values and we feel that that's enough, and it's not.
No, exactly. So someone's like, am I going to stay here for the next 4 years because you're interested in integrity? Is that a differentiator? Hopefully not, right? We'd like to think that there's other stuff going on. So I think it's more about giving people a clear vision of, what are the type of people who will excel in this business? What are they going to get out of their employment in this business? What are we trying to build, as an organization? How are we trying to impact our customers, our candidates, all of our sort of stakeholder communities? But I think it's weaving together the employee journey with the business journey so that somebody can look forwards and say, if this plays out as it's been, depicted to me, this is going to be super exciting. And then it comes to the point of, okay, great. Then there is the incentive structure on top of that, which is that, the cherry on top, as opposed to that's all we've got.
Got it. Yeah, I like that. I guess you may not be able to do this, so I'll ask the question anyway, though. Can you think of any examples of people who have really got it right when you've worked with them? I'm not saying drop a name here and name the company and give us all the details of the gory side of it about what went on to get set up to that point, but can you think of an example of a type of company you've taken through that journey?
Definitely, yeah, and I wouldn't take the credit for it, but I've worked with businesses who've got it right. So I mean, they're businesses in for example, our sort of customer network, where their focus is from the very beginning been, we are going to take one example, build a community, and we're going to actually genuinely, really seriously build a community. We're going to have all sorts of different components in ways in which we're going to be adding value to our sort of our candidate and client base. And that is going to be something we're going to take incredibly seriously. We're going to be streets ahead of every other, staffing agency that claims that they have, some sort of community initiative going on, and that is going to be a real differentiator. So that is a vision where, to pluck one example out of the sky, their team really feel like we are on a mission here, and we've got something that we're trying to accomplish, and it is new in our space. And if we pull it off, we will be very proud. We've got to look over our shoulders and say the last 18, 24 months that we've been doing this, yes, we've hit sales goals, and yes, we've been, paid out for doing so, but also we've made tangible progress towards creating something that 24 months ago just didn't exist, and that's very satisfying, as opposed to saying like we've banged in deals here and there, and I guess we could do it again for another 12 months, but we're not really going anywhere. So I think it's just there are any number of elements of different ways you can do it, but that would be one simple example.
Okay, I like it. And then as a company starts to scale, let's assume they get to 10, 15, 20 plus heads, for example, and suddenly that founder who carried all that passion and could convey that purpose across to those that he was hiring in or she was hiring in, you then have a team that maybe has a team under them that is then hiring people, and you've got to try and maintain that vision all the way down to the end of the tree branch, essentially. How are you then reinforcing that in someone else's hiring process, someone else within your team, of course, who maybe has got a different take on what they should be looking for in the hiring process, what they should be excited about? How do you protect this thing that you work so hard to craft in the early days as a company scales?
Yeah, I mean that is obviously a big challenge. I think obviously a huge part of it is
the $1 million question. The $1 billion question for many people, I'm sure, as well.
There we go. So a big element of is the selection of your leadership team and the criteria that sort of enables people to progress into leadership. So I think that's an area where, in the recruitment sector specifically, it's not always done as well as it could be. People are promoted into leadership positions on the grounds of performance, being great salespeople, and they then become the sort of cultural ambassador on the front lines of screening, presenting the business. And if they are not aligned to the senior management, ultimately up to the kind of the owner founder of the business, that is a problem. So if you've got people that haven't been put in those positions for the right reasons, you're going to have a big disconnect there. And I suppose the other key element is just standardization of your processes. And again, if the groundwork hasn't gone in to say, are we vetting and introducing the business and the opportunity and scorecarding candidates against what we really care about? If that's all done in a way that's slightly ragged, and we trust so and so to go and build a team because they seem sensible and they've had good sales results and they did it in company ABC where they used to work before, then it will get diluted very, very quickly.
I have to ask this question as well, because I feel like it's the thing that anyone outside of recruitment, because we do get some non-rec listeners listen to this as well, which is quite interesting. Many kind of carry the expectation that a top biller in recruitment is a top biller like in any sales industry. They kind of break the rules, they do things their own way, they don't do their CRM admin, but they make loads of money. And you're on about, you take these top billers and help them go on and set up their own businesses. How often do you find there's a bit of like a, whoa, like what the hell, when you get these people trying to come into their own businesses? Are there any surprises they come across, or a way of doing things they haven't thought about, and you have to kind of coach them through that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, there's a ton of surprises. Almost all of our customers are first-time business owners, so there's a lot that's coming at them that is new.
A lot of hurdles.
I think probably the biggest thing, and it sounds very simple, but most of the people that we work with, they know what good looks like from an organization and scale perspective because they've been in businesses where it's been done well. That's not all of them, but the biggest thing is just the kind of cold bucket of water over the face of you're going to have to do this now yourself. And
Yeah.
that's the challenge, is when do they start to operate their business like a business that is going to scale? And so it's the biggest trap is people come in and they'll do exactly as you've described, that I am, I back myself. I'm a very confident biller. CRM's a bit of a mess. Don't book my deals. Don't log this, blah, blah, blah. And they then say, right now I'm, got enough cash in the bank, for example, to want to reinvest in building out a team. And ultimately they haven't developed any kind of a blueprint to be able to do that because they don't know their own funnel conversion stats. They haven't built a sort of benchmark for what their own performance looks like. So then, kind of trying to build on that is very, very difficult because they've got no data. So that's probably the it's very, very straightforward, but it is the most important thing, is to just log your activities. Even if you don't have a manager reviewing them, even if you don't have anybody else scrutinizing them, it will ultimately become the only watermark that you have for what successful looks like. And when you come to set goals for the first team members that you hire into the business, if you don't even know what your own stats look like, you're really plucking out the sky to set any kind of objectives for anybody else.
It's just a really interesting thought that I had, because I know plenty of founders of recruitment businesses who aren't like that. I was just curious if you're seeing a lot of top billers. Yeah, the stereotype carries across for a reason in many ways, and what kind of behaviours you saw. But it sounds like overall they're willing to learn and grow, which is the important thing.
Yeah, I think I would say 90% of them, yeah, know that kind of total maverick behavior is going to lead them on a path to
trouble,
zero growth. Yeah.
Totally. Cool. All right. And then the second topic then you were speaking about was around this alignment of incentives to lifestyle, right? And I can think of a few technology businesses who have sort of said, wrongly or rightly, they've been like, you know what? Our mission, our vision, that stuff does not matter. What people really want is to know where they're going to be in their career in 5 years by being at this company. And they'll sit down and map out goals and say, right, I want to buy a house. I want to be able to afford this car. Sit down and say, right, and here's how we get you there with incentives, essentially. So at this point, I imagine you don't quite have that exact thing in mind, given, like you've just said in the previous answer, is much about hearts and minds as well as the incentives to drive people. So when you're talking about staff retention by aligning incentives to lifestyle, what do you mean by that?
So I guess just coming back again to experience and what we've seen with the businesses we've worked in, I think it's just this concept of designing your incentive plan is obviously really important. It sets a huge kind of tone. It's also important financially for the business as it plays out and people actually qualify for some of these incentives. But the thing that's sometimes a little bit counterintuitive, kind of takes a while for founders to figure out, is that there is a very emotional relationship between employees and the incentives that they're being given. And it's not always rational, and it's not always purely financial. And there's all sorts of situations where getting something, a gesture, something personalized, something recurring, that's of significantly lower monetary value than a big chunk of cash is massively more incentivizing, massively more meaningful. So I mean, businesses are out there doing all sorts of stuff from having like highly custom, incentives for their team that are built around their interests, or something, an experience that they know they would love to have that varies across the team. One way of doing it, but also I think it's just kind of stitching stuff into the like recurring process of being an employee of that business. And if retention is your objective, then it sort of creates a bigger and bigger gap between I work here and this is what my life looks like. I go and work somewhere else where there's an apples to apples comparison, perhaps on the purely financial side, that's relatively similar, but the incentive culture that I've been able to kind of build for myself is not going to be replicated over here. So I think it's just kind of making sure that people's kind of experience of being an employee gets progressively more exciting, more kind of in tune with whatever kind of work-life balance they're trying to build for themselves, versus just layering on more and more financial incentives and thinking that you can't do anything more than just chuck money at people.
What's the, I don't want to say wackiest, because that makes it sound like it's all crazy, but it's not. But what is maybe the most out there thing that you've seen someone give in that sort of sense? If it's not about purely being the monetary side of things, what has someone give that might feel like a bit of a money can't buy sort of maybe experience?
Yeah. Oh God. Good question. So I mean, there's a big range, right? So I mean, you obviously got super obvious things, are things like company cars, right? But it's meaningful, and again, from a financial perspective, the cost of the company of paying for whatever it is, hire purchase lease deal, versus paying a bonus is probably significantly less. But again, somebody's like, wow, I'm in a sort of awesome vehicle that I probably wouldn't have reached out and spent my own money on, through to travel through to, expenses credits, somebody that knows once a month if I hit target, I get to, dine out in a really nice top end restaurant. That's cool. That's a perk. I get to, I don't know, take my partner along. And that's cool. That would stop if I worked somewhere else. Really kind of like out there stuff. We've had customers who've actually looked at people's entire, sort of looked at like an executive life plan for people, where they've said, let's look at everything that you don't like doing, that you kind of don't want to put your hand in your pocket for. And it might be literally like dry cleaning or getting your house cleaned or assistance with childcare. And it's kind of, if you were an elite performer and somebody else stepped in and said you could have an even nicer experience, I don't know, upgrading travel and lounge access and social clubs or premium gym membership or nutritionists, and there's all sorts of stuff. You probably don't want to do them all, but these are kind of little things where you start to kind of invest genuinely in your people, and they then develop a lifestyle within the business, which is not necessarily coming at the same net cost as if you were just saying bang bang, let's just chuck bigger and bigger bonuses at you.
It's a really interesting one, because I could imagine a cynic would listen to you say all this and say, but those are things that someone could just take some of their commission check, for example, and go and pay for of their own accord. And even greater than that, some might turn around and say, well, you're offering all these great perks, a company car to someone, for example. What if someone turns around and goes, well, I don't need a company car. I've got my own that I'm very happy with, or I don't want to clean there. I'm happy cleaning myself. Like, how do you then, for every person across your business, gives them something that feels quite bespoke to them, I guess. And where this then leads to, at least my answer I would come to, would be more looking at things that is kind of like a money can't buy experience, right? Things that only you as a company can provide. And to give an example on that, like, one thing that we do is once a year take that whole team away for a week. And there's a mixture on those days of working and then going out and doing social activities. Now, some might hear that and say, well, they can go away themselves and do those things. And I say, yes, but not with their team members, the people they spend, essentially just under half of their waking hours with, which sounds crazy to say when you think about it out loud. But those are the kind of experiences that you can't repeat. So I guess on your side, it's a similar thing. It's, if you are, giving them these experiences, being able to do it with people they care about and respect that they work with day to day through the whole hearts and minds things you spoke about, that becomes quite a unique experience that you can't just go out there and spend money on, right?
Yeah, and there's effort involved, and there's always, I think, when it is your own net earnings, there's a very kind of different emotional response to how you want to deploy that cash, right? There just is. So I think we've worked with people where they're sort of high performers. They will, I don't know, they'll send sort of high end vehicles to pick them up, to take them on business trips, to drop them off at airport. And I think if I were doing that, I wouldn't pay for that. But it's nice.
It's
I
very
enjoy it
true.
when it happens to me.
Very
It's very
true.
good. If I go to a competitor, are they going to do that for me? No, because I haven't earned it, because I haven't been there, delivering year in, year out. So they're just not going to match this. And when that's coupled with a bunch of other stuff, it's helpful. I mean, we've had businesses where they will invest, they will pay for somebody to be mentored in a certain skill area, for example, which is, I suppose, getting more into, again, are they going to go and find a mentor and engage them and sort out the terms of engagement? They're just
Probably
not. So this is all sorts of stuff that just gets switched off if they make a switch, which is totally fair and good. But from an incentive perspective, it's just so much harder than saying my annual bonus is 25%. This company's offering 23. Can I get them to bump it up 25? Then it becomes a straight switch. It just I think makes it a little bit more nuanced.
No, I completely agree on that side as well. And it all makes an awful lot of sense too. If we then dig into that third area, because I guess this all comes back to, you're speaking here about like rewards and the unique things that tie up with their lifestyle. That does kind of require people to perform to a certain level. And we can dig into a whole thing here around performance management. Heaven knows that we normally do. But you mentioned again back at the start, OKRs, which I don't really hear that term being used all that much in recruitment outside of a few of our customers that are like hell bent on them being the best thing since sliced bread. So I'm really curious to get your take on what the use of OKRs is, how that can help individuals perform better, for example. And yeah, to share some thoughts around that. I'm sure we can dig into this one for quite a while.
Yeah, sure. So I guess for anybody that isn't familiar with them as a sort of concept,
Do the intro if you like.
It's basically got a goal setting framework where you have an objective, which is the thing that you want to achieve, and your key results are your measurable targets. That help you kind of quantify whether or not you've hit your objective. We found them very useful in working with our customers in recruitment. I guess they are new to most people, not all, but most. And probably where they're most helpful is when we look at people who are sort of planning to go and sort of build a recruitment or a staffing firm of whatever kind. In the early planning, there are some really good goals that they're setting, but there's also a slight kind of blurring together of some of these are goals, some of these are tasks. And some of these are goals that if you hit them, wouldn't necessarily indicate that you had built a successful or robust or a healthy business in their own right.
Massively.
So a lot of it tends to be like a headline stat. Let's, first year we're going to do 1 million. And you think that's great, but that kind of hides how that 1 million was achieved, right? So it could be sort of a really unhealthy customer concentration, or a bunch of fluke events that lead to it, or it could also mask the fact that there was other really important stuff that you were supposed to be doing on your way to doing 1 million that never happened, but the 1 million still happened. So we had a good year technically, but we didn't really. So a lot of what we're trying to do with our customers is just just help them build a sort of balanced framework where they're keeping in view the various things that need to be built in parallel, so that nothing gets neglected in the pursuit of one or two big goals that mean that everything else can just fall by the wayside.
That's fair. I think where many really struggle to get started with OKRs when they look at them is like, what OKR should I take? Should I just have really generic ones like increase revenue so we can still grow? And then you just pick a revenue number and a close rate and say, cool, that's an OKR done, right? In a recruitment context, can you think of maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 key examples of OKRs that you've seen put in place that people have employed and what it's helped them achieve by having that framework in place?
Yeah. So before jumping into the examples, like the benefit I think of the concept is like forcing people through the kind of thought exercise of just quantifying how they're going to improve their business. And that's, I think, probably the hardest bit is it's probably not that hard for people to choose the objectives. It's hard for them to choose the key results. So if somebody says, like, an example we often use when we're explaining to people is if you say, right, what are my goals for, I don't know, Q4? One of them might be, erroneously, we're going to redo the website. And so we would say, like,
And that's a
redoing your
task.
website, that's right. You can redo your website and waste a bunch of money, and it has no net impact whatsoever. Whereas you could, I don't know, it could be increase your inbound traffic, right? And how are you going to do that? Well, we want to, increase our sort of on-page conversions. We want to increase the volume of conversions on a particular page of the website or a sign-up form or whatever. But once you say, okay, why are you rebuilding the website? What's the importance of that? You can break it out into part of it is conversion, part of it is brand awareness, etc. And then you put yourself in a situation where you have to quantify how you're going to be able to say whether or not that has succeeded as a project. And it's just a different way of thinking about what you're doing. And then what we found as well with the customers that we support is that it gives them a nice framework where they can start to kind of cascade that down into their team. And they can say, great, okay, well, a lot of this thing that's really important for the company isn't going to happen unless it's delivered at an individual level or a sort of team level. And then so it's kind of, you have your OKRs that fit within your corporate model. And in terms of what we do with our sort of customers and their planning is we'll look at a 12-month framework, right? What would be a phenomenal, successful 12 months here within this business, and then of that, how much of that needs to happen in this kind of upcoming quarter, the first sort of 90 days of this period? Probably not some of the stuff that isn't going to be triggered until we get to other bits and bobs. And then it gives them a nice structure where they can start to track against the 12-month view, but also have a focus, right? This is what we need to get done now. Otherwise, we're going to be off track or, behind the curve later on in the year.
Yeah, big fans of the model often say that you can be one person in a 200-person plus company, and you can see, essentially boiling up a tree of OKRs, how you ultimately impact the overall company objective, right? You can see, like you might have said there, it's to increase the conversion on this landing page, and you might start saying, okay, then we'll do a little bit of tweak with the website designers, and we'll see what we can get done. But you can see how that conversion then trickles all the way up to more revenue coming in, and the company ultimately achieving its growth goals. So it's good, I think, for alignment, and also, like you keep on, like you said earlier on, back to that sort of purpose point, is you can see the impact that you're having, not just on yourself, but also your team, and arguably even the company beyond that as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely key. I think there's a bunch of it is difficult to kind of get your head in the game, but once you get the hang of it, it starts to make a lot more sense. And I think it does kind of segment out that this is just stuff that we feel like we should be doing versus why we're doing this and what are we hoping we're going to get out the other end of it. And it just, I think, helps you kind of look at the business through a performance lens, more than just a kind of, we've got a bunch of work to be done. Let's just hack our way through it.
Absolutely, yeah. What are the key mistakes that you've seen people make? I know, like you mentioned the whole like website example a moment ago as well, but that's kind of more of a people who aren't using OKRs and why a framework can help them. But what are the main mistakes that maybe you've seen either your clients or other recruiters make when using OKRs?
So I think, without a shadow of a doubt, the easiest one is just because they've got the framework, they populate it and they've set goals for the sake of setting goals, and they don't believe in them, and they don't think they're going to hit them, and they haven't really thought them through. Another thing I think is and like to something maybe that relates to this is not having good enough data to be able to set goals is a big challenge. So if you know, for example, one of your biggest issues as an agency is that you need to increase your time to fill, right? You're working jobs for too long, or you need to increase your fill rate. If you can't really, with a couple of clicks, jump in your CRM and go, we fill 40% of the jobs that we post to the system. How are we going to fix that? That needs to be more like 75, 80. That's our big mission. Yeah. Then if you haven't got the data, then you're just pulling numbers out of the sky. So again, it all comes back to this, the better your operational data, the easier it is for you to say, right, what do we need to adjust to see if we can move the number on this dial? Because that's the dial that matters to us. So that's probably the biggest one, is just looking at it and going, right, I'm going to have to make some of this up because either don't have the data or haven't done the thinking. Whereas people who start with looking at their operational data and say, okay, well, that's not a good number, that's one of the ones that we need to shift this quarter, it's a much easier process.
It's one common thing I've always seen is really with your key results that sit under an objective, it needs to be either maintain a number at a certain level if you are happy with it, or it's increase it from X to Y, or if it's a negative number, decrease from Z to Y, or whatever it might be, right? It's making sure that, like you say, that before state and the after state that you want to achieve, that will say, if we do that with across these 3 or 4 numbers, then the objective that we set is achieved, right?
Exactly that. And not choosing key results that are ultimately all just repetitions of each other, right? Or key results that would be achieved if the objective were achieved. So which is the tail wagging the dog, which is another issue that you often have.
Cool. And then what things do you think, if people are looking to get started with it today, and this is maybe you can plug yourself a moment here as well, people are looking at that and saying, actually, I'm curious about OKRs, I'd like to learn more about them. Where would you generally say, go and look as a base resource? Because remember when we first started looking at them a couple of years ago, there is just 10 million things out there, and so much of it is very, very vague. It's not particularly helpful until you find a real gem. You're kind of still wading around, feeling a little bit lost. So specifically for those in recruitment, maybe yourself included, where would you recommend they go?
Yes, it's a tough question. I don't know off the top of my head where because we've been through the same process that you've just described. That there's 10 billion bits of stuff online. There's loads of OKR builders. Some of them are so simplistic that they're basically useless. You might as well just do it on an Excel file or a piece of paper. And some are so complicated you think, Jesus Christ, we don't have time to learn how to use this software. So what I suppose, I don't know where I would suggest people would start from off the top of my head. Probably the easiest thing would be any number of the blogs hanging off like OKR tools, which are designed to kind of whet the appetite and show people how it works and give them some examples. What we've done within our business is we have a sort of a library of OKRs that are kind of available off the shelf. So if people can say, like, my big issue is I need to increase my, I don't know, per head net fee income generation. That's my big goal. Great. So then here are some key results that would be sensible. So we give people a bit of a push in the right direction, and we give them things to think about across their business. And that's been helpful for us. So I think anywhere that you can get your hands on a few templates that just get you thinking in the right direction can be helpful.
Got it. And I'll ask you the last question around these, and then we'll go on to the story time. Story time is my favorite time. Do you, and this is more like a technical detail inside of like OKRs, but do you believe they should always be company and team level, or do you believe that individuals should have their own complete OKRs to manage as well?
Our experience has been the individual ones are really important too, and they're a more effective way of sort of pulling together employee development and performance management. That's one thing that I think we've seen that's been really useful. So probably immediate answer would be pretty big advocate of having them at the individual level.
Makes sense. Cool. I'm all down for that. Cool. Right. Story time was my favorites. So what we always look for here is a story that you think of, it's your favorite story, it makes you feel good, it's positive. There may be one that's more of a horror story, and it hasn't always got to be what's happened to you. It could be someone you know, it could be someone in a team that you've worked in. Take your pick on this one. So give me your favorite. Let's go your favorite story first, your positive one.
Favorite story? From experience?
It could be from experience. It could be the impact that you've seen someone have on others. It could be impact you've had on others and what they've gone on to go and do. It can be anything. So mainly from a leadership perspective, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, probably a sort of a pretty important one in my own career. So way back when I was in the trenches on the recruitment front lines, we basically developed a very lightweight business brokerage service line where we had a niche base of customers where there was a lot of roll-up activity going on. There was a lot of acquisition happening. And we thought we actually have pretty good sort of X-ray vision into a lot of these businesses. We know a lot about their customer base, their alignment. We're well positioned to generate a finder's fee from some introductions. The first time that those closed, I mean, that was we had sort of a fee that would have been in the multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars in a business whose average fee size was probably 13K. So that was pretty cool for us when that started to gather traction, principally because it was just really exciting. We spent a lot of time, trying to develop in junior salespeople kind of this, like, you've got to reach for the stars. There's zero reason that you have to sort of move around candidates at a very low salary band. It's, go out, build your market. Don't be frightened to talk to senior people. You can kind of, build yourself into a position where, your average fee size can really be. And it was nice to be able to bang something down and go, there you go. It's doable. It's absolutely doable to the degree that, you can sell companies. So that was pretty cool. That was good fun because I think there was a lot of like, it built a lot of belief in people who previously had felt like, well, I guess this is it. This is what I've got to work with, because our business had never done that before. We're obviously, it was all at that point very exploratory, but it was awesome to bring it to fruition.
Nice.
That'd be one.
Cool. That's a good one. What about horror story? It's where you get the best dirty details. Like someone starts telling a story before and then back out of the. I can't tell that story. I'm just like, oh, come on, tell me afterwards then at least.
Horror stories. So probably in the world of sales, worst personal story. So I mean, we built our early business mostly on junior sales talent. So grads and people with minimal experience. And I remember we had one particular individual who went on to have a great career in sales, still in sales now, but was super nervous about actually getting out and having their first kind of real live rehearsal, getting in front of customers, cold calling. And we did a lot of training, we did a lot of role playing, and really it was a big exercise in building up somebody's confidence. It's not as bad as you think, right? You're not, that no one's going to bite your head off. And they wouldn't do their calls in a sales floor environment, had to go and shut themselves off in a conference room. Mate was like, everybody geeing them up through the glass in the door, and just got their head bitten off and came out in absolute floods of tears. And had been absolutely chewed out by some particularly disagreeable person. It was incredibly difficult to sit there having like amped somebody up going, trust me, you're just going to go in there. They're going to love you. It's all in your head. It's absolutely fine. And it was literally a horrific punch in the face. It was kind of undermines a little bit your cheerleading from the sidelines, but it was a question of, unfortunately, you've literally hit on an anomaly very, very early on with your first ever call. Give it another spin, and obviously they took it from there, and they did really well. But I think it's
only uphill from here, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not unless they come out the telephone, it's not going to get much worse than that. But I think that was pretty kind of dispiriting as a sales manager to have thought we brought somebody to the point of like believing that everyone else is going to see in them what we see in them, and then just have it shot down in flames on the very first trial out. But they came back from it.
Good. Nice, cool. Two little fun stories there, actually. Yeah, quick fire round then. A few little quick questions for you on this one.
Sure.
So, first one, favorite book or podcast?
I don't know. I'm not a huge podcaster. I suppose like many others, I enjoy The Diary of the CEO from time to time. It's a good show. I've also I got roped into listening to a podcast called The Rest is History, which I really enjoy, which is nothing to do with sales and recruitment. Probably where I would spend most of my podcast listening time.
I got recommended a podcast yesterday that was like two comedians that do it, or former comedians now, because the podcast is like one of the most successful in the world, and I forget what it's called. Got it written down, so I need to listen to it tonight now. You've reminded me, so thank you for that.
That's all right.
What about books? Do you read many books?
I used to. I've got 2 young children. I haven't got any time to read.
There are only books you're reading the bedtime stories.
Exactly that. Yeah, none of which make my favourite list by a long shot.
Fair enough.
So yeah, that's on pause for another 15 years.
Fair enough. I hate using the word sometimes, but favourite LinkedIn influencer? Who do you go to for information, for inspiration from on LinkedIn?
Don't know. Personally, I think it's really hard. Although he is everywhere, I think the work that Hisham and Hector are doing is absolutely brilliant. So I'm a huge fan of that. I think it's really. I thought his product in the first instance was a great shout, but I think specifically the efforts that him and his team have gone to just really, bring to everybody's easy consumption all of the kind of top performing insights and all the journeys. I think it's been brilliant. So that's pretty hard to beat if you're interested in the recruitment space, to keep an eye on what he puts out. I think it's
Great
fantastic.
shout. Love it. Nice. And then this last part is 3 tips, and it's for different. Each tip is for a different kind of person. First one is for aspiring managers, those that are currently top billers, want to make that jump in towards being a manager, or so they think they do. Second one is for those that are current managers, done it for about a year or so, and are really looking to kind of get to that next level of leadership. And the last one is for actual leaders themselves. What tips would you give to each of those 3 people?
So I think
it's quite a big ask.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I don't know how qualified I am to answer this question. I can shoot from the hip. What I would certainly say, if you are kind of going into management and it's your first attempt at it, is it's very simple, but it's really important to think about what kind of a manager and a leader you would like to work under. That is incredible. I've worked with several people in several businesses where I've thought it's odd because you are not the kind of person that you behave like when you're in charge of managing people, because you're performing, you believe that there's a certain expectation of you. I think that's really important, to take a step back and say, am I, it's really obvious stuff, but am I treating my team? Am I being the kind of, whatever it is, leader, mentor, coach to my team that I would really appreciate working under? And not thinking, there's a big gap between me and them, and I'm some sort of internal boss figure. And that's, I think, a difficult way of going about it. It's much easier to think like, how would I respond to how I'd like to be developed, and then that's your playbook to some degree.
Fair enough. Like that one as well. Cool.
To who's next on the list?
The current managers, 1.5 years in the role, really want to kind of grow up to be a leader at some point.
Yeah. So I guess, like, looking at everything through our kind of recruitment goldfish bowl lens, the biggest thing that I would think is probably important that we see regularly is reaching outside of your current business for mentorship and for ideas. There's definitely a big I think it's changing, but historically there's been a big kind of tribal mentality in recruitment that we don't acknowledge that there's anybody else out there doing this, and if they are, they're rubbish by default. And sometimes that can be really limiting, because if you're trying to develop your career may not be with that organization for the entirety of your career, and if your ability to develop is entirely dependent on the leadership team that you have in that company, and you can only learn from them and you can only copy what they do, and that is your world, then that is potentially super limiting. So I think it's just like having, it doesn't mean you need to, you're not going to go over the road and sit down and have lunch with somebody else's manager, but exposing yourself, whether it's through reading or listening to podcasts or whatever it is, recognizing I shouldn't live in this blinker mindset that what happens within this company is how you have to do things, because that can be very damaging. And in small businesses, you can have pretty awful examples to follow.
Yeah, no, a really good one as well. Because I think when people hear from their managers or their leaders like, "Oh, you should find yourself a mentor," they're just like, "Well, how on earth do I go about doing that? Do I message someone and just say, 'You're right, mate, you want to be my mentor?'" It doesn't really work like that, does it? It's much more about that relationship building and finding those, maybe at networking events or whatever else it might be, who you can just go and learn something from.
Yeah,
Like
and luckily, there is loads more of that content around in the last few years than there's ever been before. So I think it's getting easier for people to do.
As much as it's full of a little bit of rubbish sometimes, is very, very good for that, I think.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, you get more recruitment business owners being interviewed for an hour at a time on any given topic you choose to follow. So I think there is definitely some exposure you can get pretty easily. But it's just that danger of thinking like, okay, there's only one way of solving any of these problems or approaching any of these topics, and that's what I see happening every day within the 4 walls I work in.
Okay, nice. And this one will probably will feel very relevant to you, given it's kind of what you do today. But a tip for a leader, someone who wants to grow a business better, become a stronger leader, whatever it might be. What advice would you give to them? Learn to use OKRs by the sounds of it.
Learn to use OKRs, or give it a go would be one. I think from, I'm not a leadership coach by any stretch of the imagination, but one thing that I've definitely found has been helpful for me is just being honest and transparent with your team. I think the challenging times that people get into in their leadership roles are when they feel there's an expectation that they should have all the answers, they should be right all the time, that they are some kind of omniscient being, and that's really going to set you up for a lot of disappointments, a lot of frustrations, a lot of unnecessary stress. And I think if you're able to generate, going right back to the beginning of the conversation, the buy-in that, okay, this is something that I'm up for doing. This is something I'm up for trying to achieve, being part of the team, trying to get this done. Everybody else is with me. As long as you're not a million miles away from being able to make it happen, if you're, fair and transparent with people, I think that's, to a degree, the most helpful learning that you can get is just don't put yourself up on a pedestal where it becomes very, very difficult for you if you have to deviate, if you have to re-strategize, if you have to go back on something you'd said earlier. If you've positioned yourself in a way that makes all of those things damaging to your credentials or your credibility, that's really tough. That's a tough place to live.
The really interesting part behind that I once heard was like, it's not on you strictly as a leader to find the answer, it's to help others believe that they can help you find the answer as well. So even sometimes saying, guys, I don't know, but with us, like the team that we've got here, we can figure it out and we will figure it out. It becomes much more about bringing them along for the ride rather than having you pull them along with you as if you are, as you say, some godlike figure that knows all the answers.
Yeah, exactly that. I think that's 100% it. And saying, if I can't figure it out, then we will figure it out. And if we can't figure it out, we will go and find people, resources that will help us figure it out. But that's what we're doing here. It's not, I've already done this in some weird parallel future universe, and trust me, it plays out flawless. It's exactly as you've described it.
Spot on. Love it. Awesome. And that's really the end of my quick fire. It's not really a quick fire because we spent about 10 minutes on that as well, actually, isn't it? So I need to rename it to being a slow fire by the sounds of it. But Edmund, if people wanted to reach out and ask you any questions, find out more about what you guys do as well, the way that you support recruitment and entrepreneurs and founders, where would they come to? Email, LinkedIn, what's best?
Yeah, email or LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably favorite. I'm pretty active on that, so pick up most of the outreach there.
Perfect. And your name will be in the podcast episodes. You can just copy and paste that into LinkedIn. Easy peasy.
Lovely stuff.
And then finally, any shout outs you want to give?
No, the only shout outs I'd ever want to give is to our team. We have a phenomenally hard-working team of people. They are called on to do a huge amount. We take business owners kind of from the very planning phases right through into running, scaling, and operating their companies, and that's all kind of delivered by our core group of people. So yeah, we're always super grateful for all the hard work they do. I'd be wrong to shout out anybody else, I think.
Lovely. Always like to hear a leader who backs their team, which is always good. Awesome. Well, really appreciate your time. It's been a great episode as well. Looking forward to this one getting out and hope to speak again soon. Thank you very much.
Awesome. No, thanks for having me. Cheers then.